So our third debate resolution is that banks are not to blame for the financial crisis. And arguing in favor of the motion is the Prime Minister. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The financial crisis of 2008 was not caused by the banks. It was caused by the American government, the Department of Treasury to be exact. Back somewhere in the Depression, somewhere in the 30s anyway, Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed some legislation that said that large investment banks cannot get into lending against their various clients. In other words, the commercial banks lent money and the investment banks lent investment money, and never the twain shall meet. And somewhere in the Reagan years and Clinton years, that was cut, and the large investment banks were allowed to make bets against their very clients. It's called proprietary trading, and they were allowed to do this. And there was a constant revolving door policy between Treasury Department and Wall Street, from George Bush's cabinet right into Obama's cabinet. The same gang of thieves. There was Larry Summers, Greenspan, Geithner, Paulson, and so forth. The same guys that had brought the whole tumbling house of cards down to begin with were reappointed. And these were the very people whose legislation allowed derivatives. In other words, you could actually take out insurance against your own investments, and then if you failed, then somebody had to come up with it. Well, normally that kind of thing is regulated, so banks didn't have to worry. They could lend money, they could bet money, and so forth. They bet against their clients, they bet for their clients. They sometimes altered the course of how well their clients would do. But they could do all this with impunity because they could buy insurance in the form of credit default swaps. It was a wild west, and it was allowed by the Department of Treasury, who were directly responsible. So the banks cashed in on an opportunity that was provided to them. So to say that they caused it, no. They simply took advantage of what they were allowed to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And for 3 minutes, we'll hear the arguments from the Leader of the Opposition, Susan.
I was a little surprised listening to you speak because I had for the longest time assumed that you were arguing my side. A lot of the things that I was going to say, you pretty much said for me, and the fact that you said that you can't really blame the banks for the meltdown because, well, they were just allowed to do it, so why wouldn't they take advantage of it, is kind of like not blaming a bear for tearing apart your kid in the woods. It's just a bear, it does what it does. From my point of view, the banks are 100% to blame for this. They have a fiduciary responsibility to protect all of their clients' investments. When you deposit money with a bank, you expect it to be safe. However, during the run-up to all of this, during the mortgage meltdown of 2008, they were leveraging their investments 40-to-1, which meant that when the crash happened, there was absolutely no asset base to cover the losses. Sorry? The banks all have these very brilliant mathematicians who sit in the corner and do chaos math and come up with these wonderful models on how everything will just keep increasing forever. However, when it stopped increasing and actually started to nosedive, none of their models could predict what happened, and they found themselves scrambling on a worldwide scale to come up with the losses, which is why you saw the demise of so many Wall Street firms. More of them should have gone under and would have had the taxpayers not stepped in and the government enforced that. So in some cases you are right. However, the banks are 100% to blame for this. They ignored their own enterprise level risk, which opened up systemic worldwide risk and virtually destabilized the entire world economic system. I'm done.
Thank you, Susan. And for 1 minute of closing remarks, please welcome back Mr. Prime Minister.
Well, I would agree with most of the Leader of the Opposition's remarks. She mentioned the fiduciary relationship, the fiduciary responsibility. The thing is, there was such a responsibility up to somewhere around the 80s. And then by allowing the commercial banks and the investment banks to do the same job, it was removed. The fact that there was an incestuous relationship is shown by the TARP program. These banks weren't too big to fail. They knew they were going to fail. They were too big to jail. That was the problem. So they could go ahead and do this. They knew very well that Geithner and Summers and Paulson and the same people would bail them out, and bail them out they did. And there was no contrition, no remorse. They're stronger than ever and looser than ever. So there was nothing to be gained or learned. The banks knew all along what was to be learned. We haven't learned it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We've heard the arguments from both sides. And now for the popular vote. Those who are in favor of the motion, banks are not to blame for the financial crisis, please raise your hands high. 10 people. And those who are against the motion, please raise your hands high. 10 people. So in a tie-break situation, as the Speaker, I will break the tie. I agree with the for side, the Prime Minister. So the motion is carried that banks are not to blame for the financial crisis. Thank you. Full disclosure, I work for a bank.
Not very contrite, but all right.